Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Hello and welcome to The Money Factor. I'm Richard Naylor, your host. Our guest today is Joseph Cardillo. He's an author. He wrote Can I Have Your Attention, which we're going to be talking about today. He's also a professor of English at HVCC, a black belt, and a regular guest on national TV and radio. While our TV show today is not specifically about money, it is about success, and I'd like to welcome Joseph to the show. And we'll go into why this is so important to business and just about anything that you can do.
Thank you for having me here.
You came to my attention because of this book, and so you did get my attention. But having read it, it seems to me a little in the tradition, I just want to ask you about that, of some of the famous books like Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that it's in that tradition, or am I going a little too far?
It's somewhat in that tradition. My first book, Be Like Water, is closer really to that tradition because that book was probably about 95% holistic arts and about 5% science. And then my follow-up book, my second book, About a Life, was about 40% science and about 60% holistic art. So I was adding more and more science, whereas this book is probably about 95% pure science and about 5% holistic arts. And so in some sense, it is related to those.
You did cover a lot of territory in this book.
I did.
Let's start with the title, though. Where did you get this title?
Well, I got the title, believe it or not, from a discussion I was having with my then 3-year-old daughter, and this was just one of the most remarkable mornings I've had ever. I was researching for another book, and the book that I was just finishing research on was titled The Energy Bible. And what I was doing was studying various effects of energy on the human body and the human mind. And I'd been researching this.
You're talking about energy from the outside, like radiation?
Both internal and external energies. And I really enjoyed this research, and I was about 4 to 6 years into the research, depending on where you start counting. And I could only write at about 5:30 in the morning. And I was just finishing the research up and about to hand it over to my agent. At any rate, I could only write at 5:30 in the morning because my other daughter was 6 months old at the time, and Isabella was 3. And so, you know, when one has young children like this, you can't really write anytime you want anymore. So my time was 5:30 in the morning, and my daughter Isabella came pirouetting into the kitchen while I'm making morning coffee for this 5:30 excursion. And she's pirouetting around the kitchen in a full ballerina tutu and tiara and slippers. And I said, this is great, but look out for that car over there. You're about to trip on that toy car. And she just ignored me. So I said, Isabella, you're going to trip on that car. And she looked at me and she said, I'm dancing with my heart. So I love that, but at the same time, I wanted to get some writing done at the same time. I was afraid she might really trip on this car. So I thought I'd have some fun with her. And I just kind of got down to her level and I said, Isabella, can I have your attention? And hence the title. And she just kept dancing. And at one point I said, Isabella, can I have your attention? And she said, no. And so now I was curious. I said, well, why not? And she said, well, because my attention belongs to me, and so how can I give it to anybody else? And that phrase kind of stuck with me. At the time it was humorous, and I kidded her around, and I kidded even with my wife who heard this. I said metaphysically she might have a point here. But later on that day, I went and found out who wrote a section of psychology encyclopedia, a section on selective attention. And I found out who wrote that. I called him up and I said, I'd like to talk to you about something my daughter said. And after we had about a 5-hour discussion, I decided I'm going to write this book.
Wow.
That she had said something that for me was so important that I put down 6 years worth of research and started from scratch on a new book that dealt with what human attention is. Of course, I didn't know at the time, really, what it is scientifically, why some people tend to lose it at times, which really all of us do, and how it is that we can regain it at high speed, which all of us do as well, just not all the time, and some of us are better at it than others.
That's a great story.
Yeah, and that's the truth of this book.
And I know some of that is in here, which is why I asked the question, but I didn't realize how much of an importance the question had in actually writing the book.
Yeah, it had completely changed my opinion on many things. As soon as she said, my attention is mine, so how can I give it to anybody else? Whether that was a coincidence of words or just something that we sense as very young people, and because she's articulate, she was able to, to say what most of us have felt, early on.
Whether it's true or not, it's still fairly sophisticated as an idea.
Yeah, absolutely, and it steered me to wonder because, as a person who's taught literature my whole life, I scanned many books and stories, and both fictions and non-fictions, and even poems and song lyrics and what have you, that seem to indicate my mind is my mind, and I'll do what I want or I'll do what I need, and that seemed to be important in there somewhere, and I wondered what science had to answer to that.
And I guess that's what the rest of our show is going to be about.
Yes.
Now, overall, you've got several major themes. Maybe you could say there are more themes, but for me, I picked up 3 major areas. One is meditation,
yes,
because that seems to be something that can be very useful.
Yes.
One is science, and you already said that the book is 90+% science. And the other is martial arts.
Yes.
And I think that first, let's start with that, only because you start with it in the first parts of the book, and also because I think we've come a long way in terms of meditation. It used to be that people went, woo, 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 woo. What are you doing over there? That's kind of weird. You're sitting there, and you would perhaps be looked down on as some kind of freak. Now, I'm using it in a 60s term,
Yes.
not a show. But today, not anymore. It's actually recommended by doctors and many practitioners. On the other hand, when you throw in the martial arts part, everybody raises their ears and goes, okay, yes, sir, because everybody's impressed by what they see. In meditation, you don't see anything. You see somebody sitting there. In martial arts, you see a force, and you see action, and you can't imagine how somebody could do that. So could you go into a little bit about the martial arts aspect of this?
Yes, I can. One of the reasons that martial arts has always been brought into a conversation about things like meditation and attention and what people are calling flow now, is that martial arts was from its inception was never really intended to be a fighting art in its inception. In its inception, martial arts was intended to be an exercise, a simple exercise that would boost an individual's attention and boost an individual's energy, physical and mental energy, so that when the person meditated, he or she would have a a greater sense of awareness and a greater sense of arousal and be more effective. So martial arts, the original movements of martial arts were simply intended to create that sense of mental and physical velocity of energy so that you could manipulate a meditation with more precision.
That strikes me as, I don't mean to trivialize that at all, but if you're driving on a superhighway today at 65, 70 miles an hour, many people drive 80 even, though it's generally not legal, that, you know, you're moving so fast that if somebody does something in front of you and everything is complicated, I can't imagine what would happen if everything suddenly goes wrong, you know, in the traffic. People start sliding, people. So it seems to me like almost as if it were martial arts at that point.
Oh, absolutely.
And you need to turn on some skill that we don't probably have.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where martial arts and science kind of start to come together. There are other things. I mean, for example, a skier going down a mountainside has to make, you know, adjustments at lightning speed. And, you know, a baseball player has to make adjustments at lightning speed in order to, you know, in order to accomplish, you know, what he or she is after. So other sports have that same sort of that same sort of technique, that same sort of mental technique and mechanism, and it is the same. But what's different is that martial arts were created to tap into that mechanism. I mean, they were created for that specific reason, to tap into that mechanism and to expand a person's skill within that area so that they could use that skill in daily life. That was the big thing. Nobody, as far as I know, created baseball to help individuals meditate with more enthusiasm,
right?
You know, and I love baseball. I mean, don't get me wrong here. I played baseball right through high school.
Right,
so
right.
Don't get me wrong. But martial arts were invented for that specific reason, and then that reason was also intended to have carryover into other aspects
and that's
of
the
life.
Important part.
That's the important part. Many of the lessons in martial arts, even the wording is intended to carry over into other facets of life. For example, the best example I can give you is the title of my first book, Be Like Water. Which a lot of people think, oh, it's just such a wonderful title, I understand it immediately. And it was meant to be understood immediately, and then also meant to kind of upgrade, you know, our consciousness about how to live. And the reason for that is you know, a lot of people think it came from Bruce Lee, because he used to say it all. If you watch Bruce Lee movies, you see it all the time. You see, almost every movie he says, be like water somewhere. And so people think he invented that phrase, but he didn't. The phrase comes from the Tao Te Ching, which for all practical purposes is the quote-unquote Bible of Taoism, and the climactic chapter in the Tao Te Ching is be like water, and that's where the phrase comes from. And the reason that's the climactic chapter in that text is because in that phrase is everything that anybody will ever need to know about how to live. And so in martial arts, I think it was either my first or second lesson in martial arts, my instructor was telling me, be like water. And that's why I titled my book that, and for all these other reasons. And the interesting thing was, I had no idea what he meant. Well, and it took me years. It took me years to figure it out. You know, and when I thought I'd had it figured out, I said, "Oh, he's talking about movement and the way you can roll over things and flow, or go through things, or go under things, or over things, go with things, cling to things, vaporize." You know, all this, you know, and so I started to adapt it to my movement. But, you know, as time rolled on, I realized it's way more than that. It's a way of living.
So it must be an antidote to something that we naturally don't do, because it seems to, of itself, lack a few characteristics that we have, such as our ability to act on other things, which, while water does, it doesn't really care whether it goes this way or that way.
Right. Yeah, and and even when I thought I had it nipped, I said, I really understand this. And that's the beauty of these arts. When I thought I really understood it, I said, oh, it's all about living and lessons of living. Didn't take me much longer after that to realize, well, there's another door here, and it's all about health. And if you just apply be like water to health, my gosh.
The stress goes away, perhaps?
Yes. And the way you deal with people and the way you deal with your own physical well-being and illness is a whole different ballgame.
Well, let's try to go into the book and talk about some of the other aspects, because I think for most of us, we can't really understand that without the experience that you had along the way. Mm-hmm. Now, you said science was a big part of the book.
Yes.
And there are some wonderful chapters which help us understand what's going on inside. Let's talk about that a little bit. I know we can't cover it all. Can I Have Your Attention is an easy title mm-hmm. to remember, so somebody could buy the book. Mm-hmm. But let's kind of give a flavor of some of these things that we might be experiencing in terms of the science of the book.
Well, one of the things I should mention in terms of this is I interviewed some of the best brain scientists in this country from Johns Hopkins faculty all the way to Stanford faculty.
And I know UAlbany as well.
And UAlbany, yes, UAlbany, and very well. Helped me a lot.
So, you mentioned things like dopamine. And
yes.
And the thing that I clicked with was, in that chapter, was about how it's connected to addiction. And because my wife does addiction work,
yes.
and disappointment has a lot to do with why we try some other,
yes.
Try to satisfy ourselves in some lesser way when we don't achieve what we want. And so all of these things in that book seem to really let us know ourselves better.
Yes, and that's probably at the core of the book, is that the book is intended to help people who read it know themselves better. And I don't necessarily mean that at all in a philosophical sense.
It's not the Greek statement.
No, not in a philosophical sense. Very much in a scientific, medical even sense. Because one of the things that I found out in my research is that, first of all, everybody is able to pay attention, is capable of paying attention. So the mechanism that we're working with is the same.
Just yell some fire or something.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same mechanism. The difference is what we bring to that mechanism. So, for example, it's not as complicated. You can make it very complicated, or you can look at a simplified version, understand the basics, and start using what you know. And that's what my book asks. There are five elements, or 5 items, that guide an individual's attention. The first is our habits. And I'm going to use the word habits, although scientists like to use the word procedures, but let's just say habits, because we all know what that means. So probably and primarily, our habits for most individuals are what are guiding your attention throughout the day. And if you just think about it, I mean, most of what I did this morning, just collecting myself and getting myself here, I don't think I gave an awful lot of thought to it. I just put my car keys in the car, turned the ignition on, and drove here. Thousands, probably more than that, of procedures kicking off just to get me in the car and to Albany, and I'm not thinking about any of it. So my attention, which is really a sophisticated, an ultra-sophisticated fetching system. It fetches data. It's a brain function that fetches data.
And you mean by that internally and externally?
Yes. Yes. What it is a brain function that fetches data. And I mean, we could get into it more than that, but that's okay. Really all we need. And so we want to make sure that we're fetching the data that is aligned with our goal at the moment. So the idea is this, that these 5 things will guide your attention: your habits, then your blood chemistry, which dopamine is part of, your blood chemistry, your feelings, and by feelings, what I mean is just your overall disposition. I mean, even as we talk now, I'm not talking about feelings like anger or happiness or that kind of thing. I'm talking about just a general, I feel good. I don't feel so hot at the moment, because that will guide what data you're fetching too. And then your emotions. So then you bring in things like I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry, or what have you.
And people ask us all the time, how you doing? And most people say, good,
yeah,
fine.
Just an automatic function.
But do we really even know that there's this complicated set of chemicals that are influencing how we're able to react to whatever happens?
Most of us don't, and we're not thinking about it. And the last thing that affects our attentional mechanism is our memories. So what I did last time I was in a situation like this, or what I did 2 years ago when I was in an identical situation.
And in the book you were pointing out that in certain states you're going to really remember.
Oh yeah.
Better than other times.
That's right. The closer your physical and mental, but physical environment comes to the environment you experience things in the first time, the more rapidly you'll remember things. And when you remember, see, and then these 5 areas that I just mentioned are all interrelated and can influence the others. So your memories will influence your blood chemistry, will influence then the procedures that kick in, and will influence your emotions and feelings and etc. Any one of those can ignite the rest. So for example, if you slip into a certain procedure, it could ignite a series of memories. And that's what's kind of interesting. That's what, to me, I wrote the book certainly to help people, but to give them a dazzling story about how our own minds work. It was just, eternally fascinating to me to start to discover things that, for example, we're hit with 11 million bits of data per second, and we can only pay attention to 40. That's not much.
Not out of 11 million, no.
But it's enough to create a lifetime.
And as we're driving along, you're driving here, I'm driving to work, and we're thinking about something, not totally driving generally. You think, well, what would be the most useful thing I could think about? But I think our problem is a lot of times we're not thinking about what would be the most useful thing for me to think about.
That's right.
We're just thinking about whatever happens to grab our attention.
That's right. And I think if there's anything that we can do to help guide our attentional mechanism, I mean, if we look at this objectively and we say, look, okay, here's the mechanism, it's going to fetch data. There's 11 million bits of data hitting me per second. It's going to fetch it. It's either me guiding this or it's something else making my decisions for me. Now, this is all well and fine when our decisions are successful. So, if it's something else making my decisions for me and things work out, that's great. But if things aren't working out, and they aren't working out at high speed, then it's time to start getting in there and messing, with this attentional mechanism and making it work for you, or more for you anyways.
And I was going to ask you, and I still will ask you, but now I already have some of the answers. I was going to ask you, well, how does this relate to business? Because my first dilemma on the show was, well, yes, I think this is really important, but who should do the show? Does this relate to the money factor,
yes,
or should it be a health show? Well, it could be all of these things,
yes,
and that's the problem with the topic, but it certainly relates to business. We set goals. We have a list of to-dos. Some of the goals are broad and general, and some are very specific. And as we go through the day, do we take things that are the most important at the time, or the most pressing, or thing with the, and when we do it, do we really have good attention? And I guess most people have to honestly answer, certainly not all the time.
Well, one of the most interesting things that anybody said to me while I was doing the research for the book, probably one of the top brain scientists in the world, said to me, and I enjoyed this so much. He said to me, most of us, and he included himself in on this, and me, and everybody else, said, most of us, Doesn't matter how intelligent we are, we walk around mindless most of the day. And I thought, I laughed because I said, this is a pretty funny thing for a guy who cuts brains open for a living to be saying that we walk around mindless. But one of the first things that I learned also in my research is that, there's really a difference between the brain and the mind. The mind is the content, is what you're putting in, and the brain is the matter. And so there's a difference.
And I think what you were pointing out, and the brain surgeon is a nice example, because here he's doing something that most of us would say, oh my goodness gracious, I mean, one slip, and maybe they're using these tools where they're looking at a microscope and working with tiny little cells and trying to attach an electrode or something that we can't even see. And he's saying that he's going by habit, but then I'm sure at the same time, he's very alert to anything that's going to be unusual.
Absolutely, and see, this is getting to the heart of the matter, really. One of the things, we want habits, because habits trigger in the brain at 1/600,000th of a second. So, I want that kind of speed when I'm doing things. I want that kind of speed when I have 11 million bits of data coming at me. I want that kind of speed to pick the right data.
And if all you need to do is hit the brake, you better be able to hit it.
Then it again, at the heart of the matter, this shows why it's so difficult. It's so difficult to change a habit, because a habit is going to trigger that fast, and it's next to impossible to do it in the middle of things. But you can do it in preparation for things, and you can do it with reflection on things. And so that's why, the holistic artists and the holistic arts have pitched things like meditation and reflection and visualization for thousands of years, because they somehow had a sense of this. They had a sense that these skills can literally change your life. They can change your life, and they can trigger that fast for you rather than against you. And that's the basis of martial arts. It's the basis of many holistic arts, including yoga and other meditative arts. So the idea in attention training is to try to eliminate habits that are not working for us, because they're triggering fast and getting us into high-speed trouble, and to then short-circuit those habits and create new ones of our choice, of our selection, that are in sync, or as close to in sync as we can get them with our goals. And when you mentioned goals, that also was at the heart of the book, because it's a very mindful attention on what you need to be doing at the moment. And in my occupation as a teacher, when I walk into a college class, I have to, very often I have to behave in a way that's opposite of the way I might be actually feeling at the moment. And I think in the business world, this is true too. Many of us have to take our feeling and put it over here and learn how to override it, to make an executive decision with our mind and say, I'm going to override this. I need to put my attention here on this data because it has to do with this goal. And there's a few tricks that we could talk about even.
Well, let's go right into that then.
One of the ways that you can do that is simply starting by what you said already, is when you walk into a room, let's say you're walking into a meeting or what have you, you're walking in to speak with a client, you need to be making a decision of some sort that's important, to ask yourself, just start to create the habit, to ask yourself, what's my goal right now? And although the first couple times that we do this, you have to literally think about it, so you're thinking, I need to be thinking about what my goal is at the moment. Eventually, you'll start doing it automatically. You'll do it at 1/600,000th of a second. You'll walk in a millisecond, you'll say, what's my goal? And you'll answer yourself.
And I as you say that, I can just see a whole spectrum of people, some of which really have that ability much more, and some which have it less. And the ones that have it the least, you would say, well, they're impetuous, they're trying to hog the spotlight, You know, they want attention. And the one who really can do that is sitting there thinking, how is what I'm actually going to do going to affect the result? I know I'm insulted by what this person just said, but if I go off on that tangent, how's that going to affect the result?
That's right. That's right. And I was working with quite a few medical doctors from this past May until the end of summer. And one of the things that they used to say often was that decisions in the medical world are easy. And they are. And they said, yes, they are. They said, because we ask one question. We ask, what's best for the patient? And then we proceed. What's best for the patient? And so, you know, in attention training, what's best for my goal? And then proceed, and then you start to regulate everything else. So if I'm feeling a certain way, I've got a choice. I can use that feeling to fuel my goal, or I can try to compensate for that feeling, or I can try to get rid of it entirely. You know, of course, there's times you can't. So then that's where compensation comes in. And my book talks about how you can do all three of those things. So, you know, one of the things that we can do to get our attention in line right away is to ask ourselves, what's my goal at the moment? But sometimes we don't, you know, sometimes we don't have the time to do that. We have to react. And so one of the things that we can do, visualization is a very, very old trick, thousands of years old. And, you know, why it worked in the holistic arts, nobody really cared. They just knew that it did. And athletes have used tricks like visualizations for years and years as well. You know, now they're entering, now visualization is literally entering the science communities. And you know, scientists are trying to tear this apart and figure out what makes it work. And here's what makes it work. And also, here's why, if you've tried to use visualizations and not been successful in the past, I think science comes in and explains why. What you're doing with a visualization is you're attempting to raise something in your brain to the level of habit. This idea of habit is everything. You're trying to raise it to the level of habit. So now what you've got is a high-speed procedure clicking in a millisecond. The story about how this works is fascinating, but you're better off reading the book than me trying to go into it here. But the important fact is this. To the brain, it doesn't matter if you're actually doing something or if you're just imagining it. You can create the procedure. There was a great test done where some people were taught a piano melody. A small number of people were taught a piano melody, a one-hand piano melody, and they practiced it physically for a week. The other group practiced the same melody in their head. At the end of the week, they tested them, equal. So to the brain, and this is just one of many, many, many tests, to the brain, it really doesn't matter whether you're imagining something or you're actually doing it. You can create the procedure. And athletes have done this for years. They imagine the pitch. They imagine how they're going to hit it. And then they do it. But here's the trick, and this is where so many books who rely only on holistic arts lack in explanation, in my opinion. They're not incorrect in what they're saying. They're correct. But to the inexperienced player, you know, you may not be able to do it. You read a book on meditation, and it tells you, well, if I meditate on something and with good intention, I'll be able to do it in real life. And then it doesn't happen, and people are disappointed. Science has a really good reason why that's not happening, because you have to imagine it over and over and over again until it becomes a habit. It's not going to trip in your brain if you just imagine it once or twice.
And I think plus, you know, there have been a lot of people who were talking about visualization for other purposes, such as imagine you're lying on the floor and imagine the sun is shining and the wind is blowing and there's beautiful. Well, that's nice, but it's not exactly what we're talking about here.
Right, it's not. Not exactly. And what we're talking about here is creating a procedure that will help you achieve a goal. whatever that goal may be. Maybe you're at a meeting, and you know that you have to introduce a new product, or you have to introduce a new contract, and you know that you're going to be getting resistance. This is kind of a common situation. You know you're going to get resistance from a number of people. You can anticipate that resistance. And so you do a visualization on that. And then you don't just visualize it working out. You know, somebody asked me the other day, said, oh, you know, I visualize, you know, throwing a basketball through the hoop all the time, you know, and then when I go and do it, it doesn't work. And I said, well, that's because you're not visualizing the procedure with which you're going to throw that basketball through the hoop. You're just visualizing the success. So that's not what we're talking about.
Right, it's like visualizing the final score. That's not going to get you there.
Exactly. What we're talking about is visualizing all the various ways that you can do this.
And the plays and all
the
other
plays
things.
and so on. Picking the best way to deal with it, and then creating a procedure that you think will work. And once you've got that, to go over it, over and over it in your mind until it becomes a habit. Because remember, it'll work whether you're imagining this or whether you're actually doing it in real life. And then when when the opportunity exhibits itself at the meeting, you will act that way. So if you're telling yourself, and you can use it to control actions, you can use it to control movement kind of actions or behavior kind of actions. You can use visualization to control emotions. And so, you know,
and how you react to disappointment.
Absolutely. So if you know that you're going to be getting resistance, and you know what your goal is. My goal is I want people to accept this contract. My goal is, you know, I have to introduce this product, and I need their support. So you know what your goal is, and you know that certain emotions may get in your way, then you can short circuit them with a procedure that you create before the meeting, and sure enough, if you go over it enough times in your mind, it'll happen for you.
Especially if you find the key part where you know your weakness and where you might react improperly, and you now envision yourself not doing that. When you get to that point, you can call back that memory.
Right, now it's a memory, and memories can also incite your whole biological system as well. So they'll incite, you know, adrenaline. They'll incite dopamine. They'll incite oxytocin, and so on, serotonin, and you'll react the way you want to react. So what you're doing really by creating this procedure is you're really controlling your body and your mind, and you're syncing it up with a very specific goal. Now, we can't do this, you know, we can't do this all day long. You know, you can't have your attention mechanism cranked, you know, full all day long. Nobody can do that. But and again, you mentioned earlier prioritizing things. You know, if we prioritize things in advance, and then we work on them, you know, on the fly. If we take one major issue a day, that's a lot. That's good. At the end of the week, you've got, you know, 7 major issues taken care of. At least that you've controlled yourself, and then you feel better about yourself. And by the way, when you feel better about yourself, that's changing your blood chemistry, and that's uplifting you. That's uplifting confidence, and so on. Another thing, and I should mention this while we're talking on this, there are some things that I call them unusual suspects. There are things that people experience that are connected to attention that many people do not suspect are connected to attention. And these are things like low self-esteem, confidence, energy levels, and depression. These elements are connected to attention. Because when somebody becomes inattentive, those kind of things tend to all start to go down. As those things go down, as those mental functions go down, your blood chemistry shifts. Once your blood chemistry shifts, those items go down even further and sink even further. And so now your body and mind are essentially working against you, but these are connected to your attentional mechanism, and further, those things can then cause health problems down the line that I mentioned in my book.
And if it gets bad, you start treating it with medication, and now you also have another whole cycle of problems to deal with.
Right. When really the cause of many of these things is, I'm going to say, a lack of attention, but it's more an act of regulating your attention. Because you're paying attention to something. You're just not regulating you're not getting in there and paying attention to the right things.
We've covered a lot of territory here, and I wish we could bring everything out to perfect clarity. But as you said, it takes a lifetime of experience to be a master, or maybe you didn't say that, but
that was the implication.
And I can recommend the book. I've read it not 100% because I didn't have time, but I've read 100% through most of it and then skimmed the rest, and I've enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
So I do want to recommend it. I thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
And maybe we'll get you back and we'll do it some more.
Oh, that would be fun.
Because I think as we start getting into the business part, it became totally clear to me that this is a business issue. It could be any issue. You could be on any of the shows.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show, that you tune in again next time, and that you have a great week. Take care.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.